can see it in our eyes. We are the revolution. We want it all tonight. We want to take back what's rightfully ours. We are the revolution.
I do have skills that make me a nightmare for people like you.
Kua haere anō tēnei nohoanga. The sitting is resumed.
Mr Chair, thank you for that short adjournment. Our first witness, Judge Carolyn Henwood, is here and we are ready to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Henwood, I have a duty under the Inquiries Act to administer your opening statement. Judge Henwood, do you solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence you will give before this Commission will be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Mr Mount.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Good morning, Your Honour. Thank you very much for coming today. For the record, can I confirm your name is Judge Carolyn Henwood, a retired District Court judge with an acting warrant?
That's correct.
Now, there's a button that will be pressed on your microphone to make it glow red. There we are.
Am I glowing?
You are glowing. Thank you, Your Honour. Now, just a couple more formalities. In front of you in a folder, there should be a copy of your statement, which I think you've already signed on the last page, page 21. Is
Yes,
that right?
I just signed it, thank you.
Now, for the record, can you confirm that is true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
A couple more formalities. We know that you chaired the confidential listening and assistance service between 2008 and 2015. I think you have a copy of the formal report of the confidential listening and produce that as Exhibit 1 for the Commission, please.
Yes, thank you. This document here, called Some Memories Never Fade, is the final report of the confidential listening and assistance service. I'd like to produce that. Of course, it is a copy because the originals were dispatched to the ministers in 2015. But that's been sent to me from Internal Affairs, so I can verify that.
Thank you. There is also a second document that I understand you would like to produce, and that is a copy of the government response to your final report. Do you have that with you?
Yes, I do.
And I'll ask you to produce that to our registrar now as Exhibit 2, please.
Yes, it's an important document. There's a couple of things I'd later on in my evidence like to just highlight, but in the meantime I'll produce that. Thank you.
Now, Commissioners, you should have copies of these two documents, and electronic copies have been made available to Council. When we have our purpose-built hearing room up and running, we will all be electronic and everything will be on screens, and this process will be very smooth. At the moment, we are in an interim position, and so where documents like this come in, we will try to make them available to those in the room electronically as quickly as possible. And if anyone has difficulty accessing any of the documents, please let the Council team know. Your Honour, I introduced you a moment ago as a retired District Court judge with an acting warrant, but I take it you have some other roles.
Yes, I think the ones that are relevant to the kind of discussion we're going to have today, I was on the parole board for over a decade, and so I had met a lot of people who were incarcerated. Also, I've chaired the Henwood Trust for over a decade, and that's a charity that works to improve effective strategies for young offenders, and during that we've done a lot of research and also worked alongside iwi to try and resolve processes and practices to get a better outcome. So those two things I think have given me quite a big knowledge, apart from being in the District Court since 1985, which certainly covered a lot of criminal work through that type of court, so I draw on all of that.
The main hat that you have on today is as the former chair of the Confidential Listening and Assistance Service. We'll call that CLASS, its abbreviation. Is there a particular reason that you were willing to come and give evidence as the former chair of CLASS?
Indeed. As soon as I heard there was going to be a Royal Commission, I was wrestling with the idea about how were we going to get the voices of the 1,103 people that we saw before this important commission. It's, to me, that is a huge issue for me, and I'm really honoured to have this opportunity to come and do that, because I'm here to speak not about all our workers, although I want to thank them, but about the people that came to see us. As we promised that we would do what we could to get their voices heard, and also to seek a better outcome for future generations. That's my goal today, and I hope that everyone will listen to what they had to say to me.
Just looking at your paragraph 4 of the written statement, who were the people who came and spoke to CLASS?
Well, it was over a 7-year period, so that's a huge amount of work. There were 1,103 New Zealanders, 552 women and 551 men, which was quite extraordinary that it turned out to be so close. We're only missing one man. They attended hearings at 23 different locations, so we travelled around the country. We also went once to Australia. And amongst that group, we saw 670 people identified as persons who were European or Pākehā. 411 of the group were persons who identified Māori. Pacific, just one, and 21 Pacific and one Asian. And amongst there were, of course, persons with disabilities, and although not as many as we had hoped, but we haven't specified that, and I haven't said that in my statement, the numbers in there.
Do you have a sense why the Pacific numbers seem a little low?
Well, I don't have any evidence for it, but my instinct was that we were doing the years before 1992, back as far as anyone was alive. I think somebody well into their 90s was the oldest person that we saw. And it may be that in that bunch of years there were not many Pacifica in state care, they more in their families. I can't know if that's true. I know Pacific people have told me that they do have many state care stories, but I'm not sure where they fit. We went on Radio Pacific, we had a Pacific person on our panel, but nevertheless, whether there were more that would have liked to come forward and didn't, I can't answer that.
Tell us about the steps you took to make sure the Maori voice was heard.
Well, right from the very beginning, we knew that this was crucial, but we'd also been advised by the authorities that some Maori communities were reluctant to come forward to government agencies and talk. So it was a challenge for us, and we had a number of Maori panellists, and we went down every road that we could possibly go down, talked to Māori Women's Welfare League, talked to iwi, talked to everyone we could lay our hands on, in the hope that some faith would be built up to come to CLASS. You've got to understand the climate at the time. This was 2008, I think you said. We were a bit poured scorn on at the beginning as a government strategy. I mean, I was told this was to be a truth and reconciliation model, something to get away from the courts, another alternative. But so people were doubtful as to whether this was going to deliver anything whatsoever. But I'm pleased to say that I believe we did what we could within the constraints of the powers that we had.
I think you've said that you found it hard to engage with the disability sector, in particular those with intellectual disabilities. Can you talk to us about that group and whether you felt that their voices were heard?
Well, I don't think they were. No, not in sufficient numbers. I mean, we had a huge response from the deaf community, for instance, and they were able to engage with us. And I'm mindful that we've got some amazing interpreters here today that we had when we had our hearings, and I must not speak too quickly because out of respect for the effort that they're making. So we had a number of successful hearings with the deaf community, and individuals came along who were unable to walk or talk or speak, but they relied on their carers to bring them. And we tried hard to engage with a number of other communities, but it just seemed impenetrable. So that's a challenge for the Royal Commission, and I'm pleased that they've got a specific person with experience and disability to be able to try and get some cut through there, because their stories are untold, but it's very difficult to get access to them.
Back to your written statement, from paragraph 5, you've summarised for us what appeared to be the main motivation for people who came along to speak to class.
I put that in my statement because, a lot of New Zealanders are very tough on children and children in care, and the attitude is, I felt when I talked about what I was doing, very brutal and, unsympathetic and lacking in empathy. Sorry, New Zealander, but this is just what it was like. And so I wanted to say to people in New Zealand, people weren't coming forward to point the finger or look for money. They came forward to tell us their own story and what they had been through, and also they wanted a better system for the children of the future. And almost every person came out with that without prompting. It was extremely dignified process and very moving. So, that's why I've come to speak up for them today, because they have not been acknowledged, this group.
You talk in paragraph 7 about the main concerns that people raised. What were they?
Well, we tried to, we had a very strong panel team with a lot of experience there, and so we did a lot of talking for 7 years, trying to hone down their issues. So the children felt abandoned, so they may have been abandoned from the original carers that looked after them, but then they felt abandoned by the state. So the state took them and then got busy and didn't come back to watch over them sufficiently well. So they felt abandoned. They felt they'd lost their identity. They didn't know who they were, and that, of course, is crucial for Māori and for absolutely everyone in care, though. They didn't know what their identity was, and they were not safe. None of them felt safe at any time. So they were on high alert always, looking after themselves in what could be a foreign environment and a dangerous one. But you've got to remember, to keep perspective, that the people that we saw were the people that were invited to come forward with concerns. So we did not have a large group of everyone in care, obviously. We had the ones who came forward with concerns.
Could you help people get access to their files?
Yes, that was a big part of our job, was not only meeting and listening to what people wanted to tell us, but also to assist them. So we did a whole range of pastoral care, and one of the key things we got for them were their files, because they wanted to make sense of their lives, and of course their lives are sort of a couple of cardboard boxes full of welfare files. Because to give you another perspective, we saw people who'd been in care for decades, and all they were those files. And they didn't have any school photos or any, one of the things I mentioned, Simon, that just to get some feeling for what this was like, when people brought us a photo of them when they were a child, it melted your heart, because in your mind's eye you're thinking, what does a welfare child look like? You have your own stereotype, must be some creature, I don't really know. And then they bring you this beautiful photo of a young boy in a cap and long socks and school uniform, and a little girl in a Viola smock dress with her elegant grandmother. And you need to see these photos. And I tell the Royal Commission to encourage people to bring a photo of them as children, because when you see that, it has the impact that nothing else can have, to realise that these are actual people. They're not statistics. They're little children, for goodness sake, that many have suffered hurt and then have to go through this, really difficult system to find a life for themselves.
At the beginning of your report to government, you included a personal tribute on page 6 of the report. I'd like to give you an opportunity to read that, if you wish. I think it's...
Yes. We put it in, we wrote a report to government. It's not a very government-like document, because what we were reporting on was not a very government-like process, so it's not using all of the, government speak. But then I felt it needed more, because I felt people will never read it. And I think I'm probably true. I don't know how many people read our report, not too many, I imagine. Or else they do a quick skim. So we wrote this because it captured what we heard. So I'd like to say that our panel members were profoundly affected by what each person had to say. As numbers grew and more voices were heard, a picture was painted for us of a careless, neglectful system which allowed cruelty, sexual abuse, bullying and violence to start and continue. Through their words and tears, we could see the invisible welts and bruises, as well as the deeper hurt and emotional damage. They told us they were not watched over nor protected. They were not valued, not heard, not believed, and not safe. All the people who came forward to speak to us had struggled to make sense of their lives. All wanted a better outcome for the children of the future. So we made a commitment to listen to them and to pursue a safer and more professional care service with a genuine framework of accountability for the future. And we were honoured to meet more than 1,100 New Zealanders during the life of the confidential listening and assistance service from 2008 to its closure in June 2015. And a key point there is a genuine framework for accountability, and that's going to be the challenge for the Royal Commission, because even though, in my experience, every time accountability comes up, they say, we've got this, we're onto it. And then over time it diminishes down to nothing. And this is the biggest, if I do nothing else, we've got to see that we have a decent accountability, because accountability brings change, brings audit, and brings improvement.
We'll come back to that point. But because it's so important, would you like to tell the Commissioners any thoughts you have about what kind of accountability regime there could be for the future?
Well, that's an end game point. I think it's up to the Commission to consider that. But for my money, I'd have an independent thing like Police Complaints Authority. It can't be in-house. When it's in-house, it just gets watered down again and there's no confrontation of the issues. You have to remember these people have no access to justice. I don't know if New Zealanders understand what it's like to be child in care. You are taken and you're detained. It's like being a prisoner, but you're not a prisoner because you're living in someone's house or in a home, but you are legally detained until you're let go. You do not know when you're going to be let go. No one might tell you this. You don't know when you're going to see your parents again. These are things that we were told. And so being detained means that you need an independent system to make this accountable. Where there's people, you can take your serious complaints. Because at the moment, there probably is a complaint system, but you can't really sue the government, and CLAS is no longer there. There's no tribunal receiving complaints about what has happened. And you can't underestimate underestimate how serious some of these cases are. And if you want to bring a case on sexual abuse or rape or something, you've got to go through the whole police process, and it's very long, it's very draining, very complex and very difficult. So if you're a child in care, your options are look after yourself, basically, which is not good enough. I'm speaking from the voices that I heard. I'm not trying to, that's very important that when I say these things, this is what people told us.
Back to your statement, paragraph 12. You talk about the dignified way that people conducted themselves at your interviews. Can you give the commissioners a feel for the way that your interviews took place? I see there were no lawyers, for example.
No lawyers? Yes. That was a blessing. Sorry. I couldn't resist it, but it meant that the people had a voice themselves. And the only time when that didn't occur well was when a counsellor or somebody came along, because they kept piping up and wanted to tell a story themselves. But actually we were wanting to hear the person tell us their own story, and that was valuable because then they heard their own story, and they, at the end of it, of course, for 2 hours of telling their story or their life experiences, they actually heard it themselves for the first time and said, well, I've never heard it all in one piece like that. So it was good because mainly because we didn't have any legal imperative. Like the terms of reference didn't allow us to call evidence or make any findings or anything weighty like that. So we used the opportunity to say, what do these people want to tell us? And we were very pleased to hear it.
Who else did you have in the room with you?
Well, we had our panellists, usually 3. Myself as chair, or in the prisons, Dr. Disley. We had the other panellists, and we had Gordon McFadgen, our director, and then our facilitators. The lead facilitator was Claire Booth, an amazing woman she was, a trauma counsellor.
Moving on to the background to class, you've talked about that from paragraph 14. What do you understand about the background?
Well, I just understood that there had been that there had been increasing numbers of allegations of people who had been in care who had concerns, either in residences, family homes, or foster care, psychiatric care. And I wasn't really present for these discussions. Before the confidential listening and assistance services, a confidential forum that Saranan Satanyan, who's our chair here, chaired that. And those were people who were in psychiatric care. So they had, I think the Crown had this huge growing numbers of people who wanted to be heard and wanted redress for what had happened to them as children. And they had to do something. And they came up with the solution of the confidential listening and assistance service. It was sold to, I was asked to take the position because I was told it was a truth and reconciliation model, and I was sent stuff from South Africa to read, and I thought, wow, this is a really good strategy. But one of the problems was that the main perpetrator wasn't present, so they were still over in their department, and so it didn't work in that sense. And ultimately, you'll see, as it played out, it didn't work in any sense as a truth and reconciliation forum, but it did work to some degree because the level of pastoral care that would be delivered to individuals one-on-one, and some contacted us for 6 years, were able to give them the time of day. If we had no money, we had the time of day.
You mentioned redress a moment ago. I'm interested to know how many people knew about their redress options at the time they came to talk to you, or were you having to explain to them?
Well, we listened at first. The way we followed the process is that we just let the people have the floor, and we encouraged them along to tell us all of the things, and we wrote it down. Then at the end, we would ask them whether they would want their file, and of course they did. So you've asked me about files before, and of course they took a long time to come. We'd have a quick option to see us, and within 3 days we would have written to them and said, thank you for coming, these are the things we've agreed to do for you, because we made a plan for each person. and then the files were on the plan, that could take 2-3 years, maybe longer, for them to come through. Then they'd arrive all redacted, so that was difficult. At the time, regarding redress, a lot of people felt they may wish an apology. So they wondered if they were owed an apology, and they certainly felt that that's what they wanted. That was iterated time and time again. They wanted that more than money. They did say to us, well, money can buy you a car, but it can't fix your past, you know. So they were aware that they could approach the department, but they couldn't approach us for those sorts of things. But we could help and support them, which we did, through the years of waiting for action.
I want to ask about your terms of reference, which are in the class report from page 45. I see that you had to ask for them to be expanded. Tell us about that.
Well, once we got into the process, it was very limited. We virtually do nothing apart from meet the people and listen. They, in a way, the terms of reference were quite arrogant because they asked us to help the people find closure. We felt that was something that was not our job because, you know, for what they'd been through, for us to help them find closure was an arrogant position, so we didn't settle on that. You'll see that we're to provide the opportunity for the participants to be supported by their family, give assistance, but there was a lot of things that we were not to do. There was a no-go zone, and that was set out outside the scope of the service. Strangely enough, Simon, you know, we spent a lot of time analysing what is it we're exactly doing, because I really personally likes to hone things down. What precisely are we doing here? You read the words, but you're not sure. Well, we honed it down to giving assistance, and that part of that assistance was the listening, and that's what it was. So it was an assistance service, really. Outside the scope, you'll see that on page 48. We can't require or compel anyone to attend a meeting. We cannot determine liability or the truth of the participants' experiences or stories. So that was a challenge because we had to be careful that we didn't determine the truth of anyone's story. But we felt overwhelmed that once you've seen 1,100 people and you had common themes, we wanted to get the terms of reference expanded to include that. So we were not to judge anyone or reach a conclusion about what might or might not have happened, including recommending a particular course of action to address issues raised, or in any way attempt to resolve differences of views, acknowledge liability or make an apology for past actions by any officials, report to ministers or share or make public any information relating to specific participant stories that we adheres or make public comment about those stories. So we couldn't even tell the relevant ministers anything, and we couldn't allow participants to have a legal representation at meetings. So you can see with that sort of scope, I know why, because they had a lot of litigation in the High Court, and they didn't really want to open that any wider. They wanted to shut that down, feeling that the High Court was not really the forum for these matters to be resolved, and that was a well stated position. So we thought about this, and we went back to the Cabinet, and we said, I think we couldn't bear to listen for all these people and not note common themes and legacies of effect. Because how could you change a system if you didn't know or have any information about what the system was delivering? And so they agreed, and we were allowed to do that, and we began to do that in our reports over time.
I see on page 47 that under reporting, the intention was for you to report to ministers.
Yeah.
Did you always also have a view that your report should be made public?
No, probably not. Being a good legal person, to me the terms of reference was what my job was. I felt that I was thrilled to hear that there was going to be a Royal Commission so that some of these things could be brought out in the public, but I didn't feel it was right that our particular participants' stories were brought into the public. Because they came in confidence, and they knew it wasn't going to be published, they were able to tell us really intimate details about their family lives, about what they suffered. And I think it was more open with no lawyers and no publication. So while it's limited for the, hungriness of everybody to know what individual people said about their lives, I think it was to the good that that didn't happen. But now we have the Royal Commission that can expand on that.
In your paragraph 27 in your statement, you talk about people being told what happened to them was the social work practice of the day.
Yes.
What was your view about that?
Well, that was one little set of words that really got my back up everywhere I went, from a minister's office to, it was all about the social work practice of the day, as if that was a reasonable explanation for what had been happening to these children. So we were very careful not to use it. I even had to point out that they were using it in letters that were coming out of the department, and raise it with the CEO. Are you sure you want to put this in your letter as a reason why people were hurt? Because I didn't believe it was the social work practice of the day. That was just a phrase they'd coined to sort of, shrug it off. But it was a lot more than social work practice. And I'd just like to say on behalf of the social workers, we didn't hear any criticism of social workers from our participants. But we were told that, this is all social work failure. I don't believe that's so. I believe there are individual cases, but I do think this is systemic failure, far deeper than any social worker. And it'd be fascinating to try and, get a deeper understanding of what stood in the way of social workers doing a really good job. Because their hearts are there, and I don't want my evidence to indicate to anyone that I don't understand how hard people work in this area, which is fraught with difficulty, both the children who find themselves caught up in it as being in care, but also the people who are the ones that are trying to offer some kind of support in life for those children. It's enormously difficult, but you've got a juggernaut of a department that just rolls on without maybe full analysis of just what do we need to be doing. Do we need to sort of report on our budget or to our minister, or are we looking at what we need to be doing for the kids?
I'm just going to check whether...
I've jumped away, haven't I?
I'm just going to check whether the pace is okay for our sign language interpreters. I'm getting a thumbs up.
Thank you.
From paragraph 30, you talk about the different forms of assistance that you were able to provide, and you may have covered some of these already, but you first talk about the value of being heard. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
Yes, I think that one of the things that we were concentrating on was to not give any indication that the people were not being heard with their story, and at the end of every hearing I would summarise back to them what they had told me almost precisely, and that was a lucky thing of being a district court judge and having to do a lot of handwriting. They record longhand, but that was valuable because for the participants hearing their story themselves empowered them, I think, because once we'd done that we could then pull out, all right, what do you want us to do to help you in your life right now? How can we do that? And then we could identify pathways forward for them. I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for, but I think that it was profound. I could give you one little illustration of someone from the Disability Commission, not the Disability Commission, someone who was disabled, who was brought forward by his family, and he had been in an institution, I think, for over 40 years. It could barely speak or function. And after coming and hearing his story, which was told by his brothers and sisters to us, and he got his CD, I was told he took the CD home to wherever he was living, and still in the institute, and listened to it for 3 months, over and over and over. And that the outcome for him was that he just grew into a different person, unrecognisable by his family. So the strength of listening to his story, told by his brothers and sisters to us, was a tool that we could never have believed the power of. So once he got it, it changed his life, and he's now able apparently to function in some real way in the community, and that was one of the most amazing outcomes that we could have expected from the simple thing of listening.
Did many people ask for their CDs, and what was the idea behind giving them a copy of the audio?
Yeah, well, it was in the terms of reference, and 900 and something people asked for their CD. Some of them just wanted buried it in the ground or set it on fire because of their anger and rage at the way they had been treated. Others wanted to keep it as a memory for their family to listen to. And others, eventually, they were sent on to the Department for Court Settlement, for settlements, because they could use them without having to appear again. So I know that a lot of those CDs were listened to by the Historic Claims Unit. Something to remember about all of this, the Historic Claims Unit knows everything. I tell the Royal Commission that. They know everything. They have files, they have knowledge, they know how to link up the pieces, they know the damage, because they supported us a lot, and we used to ring them and they'd say, yes, so I know that's happened over there. They know. So if you want good knowledge, you need to plumb into their files, into their expertise, if they're willing. And I heard the Crown say this morning that they are willing to open up the doors, so the Historic Claims Unit should come forth with what they know. That's my opinion.
I take it the CDs were the information of the participants, not to be kept as a government record.
Yes, they weren't to be kept as a government record. I'm making an assumption all of the CDs have been destroyed because they were private, and at the time we made it, we made an undertaking to each individual that they would not be given to anybody, and in that way they felt safe to talk to us about things that were extremely personal and abusive. You've got to realise some of these boys and girls were raped, anal rape, all sorts, and nasty medical conditions as a follow-on, all of this they told. So yeah, we were not going to give those stories to anybody else.
You've already talked about access to files a couple of times. You've said in the statement that heavy redactions were sometimes a problem. Yes. Tell us about that.
Pages and pages. You know, someone's so excited to get their file about their life and find they've got 49 pages blacked out. They're very angry. I think on a few occasions we took it to the Ombudsman to put up a battle to see if they could get more of that information in front of them. After all, these were their own files. I don't know the reasons. I can only assume it's because they referred to other people or carers or something that they didn't want to divulge. Who made those choices? But I think that overall the same files have come forward with less redactions on some occasions. So I guess it was down to whoever had the black pen on the day. It sounds cynical, but I think that the protective mode, you know, of the state protecting itself was quite noticeable to us on the panel.
Can you tell us about the counselling and other support that was available for people?
Yes, well, we offered counselling for people who came forward because it was offered because of the experience of coming to us and, you know, telling us about their private lives. They needed support, and a lot of people, many people took it up. We were very careful at the beginning to build a bank of counsellors that we could trust. Because with people who had been very hurt, if you go to the wrong counsellor, you know the outcome is not good. And also I asked for feedback from the counsellors, which everybody said, oh, you can't get feedback from the counsellors, they won't do it, but they did do it. We needed to know who came and did they get a benefit and was it worthwhile. And that we found it was very worthwhile. Of course, it went on from there, sorry to mention, well, many people need to go to the ACC for further sexual abuse counselling, and they would need longer periods of time. That was one of the assistance and negotiations that we did. But partway through our hearing, if my memory serves me correctly, the ACC kind of like pulled in their horns about not wanting to support people with sexual abuse, because I mean I think they could see legal aid bills and ACC bills burgeoning, but in the end that didn't prove so, and we were able to get longer sessions for those that really needed it. We did a whole lot, the pastoral care that was done by our facilitators was just phenomenal. When I used to go and visit a minister Minister of the Crown, to try and sort of hammer home some of these things, we'd take this work spreadsheet. I'd say, Gordon, you've got to bring the spreadsheet. So we could show how many phone calls, how many engagements, how much people writing the story of their lives, a myriad of different things that we did, that we tried to do to support the people. And I take my hat off to both the people and to the facilitators who made that happen.
Your focus, of course, was on the state, but yes. I see that you did have contact with some faith-based institutions where the state placed a child with a faith-based institution.
Yes, people did come forward from various places from faith-based, but we could only really see them if they'd been in state care and then placed there. Gordon McFadgen, who was our executive director, however, he did a lot of liaison with the churches because he didn't want anybody to be turned away without help. So the churches, in fact, I believe, stepped up quite a lot to receive these people where we couldn't. I'm not saying there are voluminous numbers, but there was significant numbers. And, people could be in a place. Can I say something? It's troubling, that if a child is in a faith-based place and he's still in state care, and then in the school holidays they're given to this man, and they have to go every holiday to this man, and this man is an abuser. So, what we've heard is so worrying, and it worries me now that we don't grasp this as a country, and these individual children had these experiences and they had no pathway out because their parents weren't there to broker for them, and who was to do the job of looking after them?
From paragraph 57, you've talked about challenges that the class faced. Tell us about those.
Well, those are the things, of course, that were set out in our terms of reference, those limitations that I've discussed before. So we were not to offer any apologies or compensation. And we did have some struggles because people were offered settlements, and they'd get a letter and bring it into us and say, we've been offered a settlement, but they didn't know what it was for, and they didn't. You couldn't argue with the letter. The letter had its quantum, it had 5,000 or 10,000, that's it. There's no appeal process, and what if there was a mistake? There was no way of challenging it. So it was difficult when people brought things to us. We did try to, liaise with the historic claims and with the process to try and help with some of these challenges. I think I've covered most of it because they were set out in our terms of reference. I do say there that the stories were harrowing, and I hope we are going to talk just a little bit about those stats when we get there, because I really need to be sure the extent of the violence that was perpetrated is understood by the Royal Commission.
At 61, you talk about the time when you had to close off registrations, and there were more people wanting to see you.
Yes, well, we came to an end. I don't really know why. Nobody came and said, Judge Henwood, we're thinking of closing you down. They just did it. That's how these things happen in government. So we didn't have any dialogue particularly about how this might be handled. That's why I say it came to not such a good end. But we were told that we would extend it another period of time, and then they were to be closed off in 2013. But of course we had registered already 200 and something plus people we had to work through. So at the end there were still more people coming forward, and we also needed to go while these people were waiting for the files to arrive. So a few people left hanging in the air with their settlements. A massive effort was made by the department to get those files, and they started to speed up the process and put down the black pen. We got it quite a lot quicker, but we didn't get them all by the time we closed.
You obviously made quite an effort to speak to prisoners, but tell us about the challenges you faced.
Well, we saw a lot of prisoners, but of course nowhere near the number of people that we would like to have seen. I started on the prison hearings. We went into Pirimu, Rimu, Wanganui, many prisons, but eventually I realised, because I was occasionally on the parole board, that I couldn't continue to do both of those things. So Dr. Disley stepped up and very kindly did that. It was hard for the prisons to adapt to our process, because we wanted to go in and have a hearing that was the same for the inmate as it was for a community person. So that meant the white tablecloth and the flowers and bringing in sandwiches and not being overheard by staff. But ultimately they did do it. They did do it for us. And I think they had some empathy. But of course we needed to have someone in the prisons to receive the person after the hearing, because people were very shaken once they'd sort of come and seen us for a few hours and talked about their deepest anxieties, then just to go back to being incarcerated. But I still hold the view, if it's appropriate to say now, that it was a very good process for the prisons. And having been on the parole board for so long, they try to get people to do drug and alcohol counselling, and they want them to do rehabilitation, and they've limited resources to achieve all that. But until people have dealt with their anger, ferocious anger, they can't really move forward into those more periphery things. So there's a lot of people in the institutions, because they've come through the care system, through care and protection, they've run away, been arrested by the police, stole some cars or something's ended them up in the criminal side of the ledger. Then they end up being incarcerated. So they've got on their mind what happened to them as children in care, where they may have been very seriously damaged, and many that we met were. So until this is off their mind, they're sort of stuck in that position. So we met one man at a parole board hearing, just the one, because after that I pulled out. But his story was just astonishing, because he'd been to the confidential listening and assistance service and told his story. Then he came up on my parole board about 2 years later, and his family didn't recognise him. Nobody recognised him. He'd moved on from being 16 to being 46, which was his proper age, by getting it all off his chest and then going to counselling to deal with his abuse and coming back round. He grew up in that time and was able then to take on his responsibilities as a father, as a man, as a citizen. And I think that it just leads me to a point that when we saw a lot of people who'd been in care, they hadn't been able to mature easily because they were stuck with this burden of their childhood hurt. And many had grown up and had families of their own and done a stunning job of their children, and they came with the children who were blossoming. But the parent was still struggling with life. So these are just observations.
Is there anything you'd like to say about 69 and Dame Barbara's comment about mental health?
Well, Dr. Disley, of course, is a very, very experienced woman in the mental health area, and I think she's been involved in the recent inquiry. And she emailed me just recently. I wanted to include it in the brief because she said, after the mental health inquiry, I was left with the view that if there was one thing we could do as a nation, it would be to do whatever possible to remove abuse, trauma and violence from every child's life. And she said she knows that the people currently incarcerated will be foremost in my thoughts when I talk to the Royal Commission on behalf of those who spoke to the service. And I wanted to say that because even now, looking at the mental health service, it's so obvious trauma to children, but also so many ended up incarcerated in the prisons and are still there.
Shall we move on to common themes from 71? Do you want to run us through the main themes that you heard?
Well, for those who've got the report, they'll see that at the back of the report there's a list of the index of the numbers and so on. But the main, I'll just see if I can do that myself, because the numbers were quite stark. So if you go into the appendix, the first appendix 3 is the location of where the panel's hearing and the number of people that were seen there. Then we have in appendix 5 the types of services and assistance that was provided to participants, and I referred to that earlier, and you'll see a load of things. Now appendix 6...
Page 54, I think, is it?
Yeah, page 54. Participants report on key concerns. And the way we gathered this data, we didn't do it like backwards. What we did every time we had a panel hearing, afterwards we got together and we wrote down everything that we needed to know to keep this data accurate. So we did it, the day after, before, and then also before we wrote and thanked the person coming along. So these figures were all put into the computer and they were there as we went along. So you'll see that, remembering that we saw 1,103, in those panels you'll see like sexual abuse was 626. And we were utterly staggered by that number. I mean, it's a lot of children. And some of the sexual abuse that we heard was really serious rapes. So we're not talking something that is not of concern, and criminal activity. And that, where did that take place? Well, we didn't make findings, so we didn't have evidence. We just had the reports. But there have been police cases and trials carried out, so there have been convictions. And those key concerns, the level of violence, placements decisions, 877 people were aggrieved at their placements. They were in the wrong place as far as they were concerned. And that's what they reported to us. Physical and emotional abuse, 787. So things like returning home without monitoring, you need to understand when a little child goes home, when they were taken into care and then they go home years later, they don't necessarily fit into their family and they're not wanted. So they suffer, trauma all over again because their siblings don't want them there. And so they're displaced. And one of the things I did hear was the people that were taken, maybe only one child was taken from a family or whānau because he got beaten up by a father, say, one day, just an episode, and went into care, but others stayed. And they would say, but my brothers are all in business and that's been successful. My life is been obliterated. I don't have a life. I don't have education. And one of the things I wanted to highlight, if nothing else, Simon, was the lack of education offered these children. I'd give it a 0 on the report card for governments of the day, because education didn't feature. Of course, some education featured, but I don't think there was any aspiration for these kids to go to university or anything like that, let alone not leave school at 15 and go start working. So that would, because we were hearing from the early days, we heard from children who were lifting coal down in the South Island, and hundreds of little boys with no underpants and grey shorts lifting coal off the back of coal trucks. I don't think education has been, any government at any time has been willing to front up with that. And that is a great pity, because the potential of all these persons is lost. That's not to say that we didn't see some stunning successes, people who had educated themselves and were just saying, well, I'm going to get myself out of this. But I just highlight that because I worry now what sort of education is being given. How low quality it is. Very hard to do, but it's got to be done properly. So you'll see in those figures 334 people. The irony of people were taken for truanting, for goodness sake, and then they weren't given an education. They were stuck in an institution. And they say, well, I want to go back to, or keep going to my school. They say, no, you can't keep going to your school, you've got to go somewhere else. And so lives are destroyed. One person had been to 12 different schools, ended up back at the same school, but had a different name, because her name was changed every time her placement was changed. So these are the practical things that happen to individuals.
Can I ask you about the cultural concerns? Were people concerned about placement of Maori children?
Yeah, well, culture, this is the identity issue that one of the key concerns. Yes, well, I had a wide range of stories. Well, culture was extremely important to Māori community. And I met we're 411 Māori people, so they were keen to discuss that. But I have to be honest and say some of those Māori people had bad experiences in state care with Māori. So they were saying to us that if we are not in the right place with the right whānau, then it's no good. The quality of the place is the thing. And one amazing woman who, I think she won't mind if I quote her today, she was a Māori lady, spent her whole life in care. She said, you've got to pick the best strawberry in the box, because a lot of whānau turn up to these meetings, but there's only one member of that whānau who's the right one to take that child, who care, who love. So there's a lot of whānau that look good, but they may not be the right placement. And so that's the advice she gave me, so I'm giving that to the care system. Make sure you get the right strawberry from the box. It sounds trite, but how true it is. So yes, cultural, it's going to be a challenge for Māori, and I'm sure they're going to relish the challenge, but professional people have to be the ones to decide what is the right placement. When I say professional I mean trained people, not necessarily government people. Because to be fair, I did meet a young Māori woman who was suddenly given to her Māori father, and he tried to murder her. So I'm not glossing over the fact that this is an easy thing to resolve. It's going to be a challenge, but the culture is very important. And I have to say we were grateful, because we were challenged by a lot of Māori men who were in gangs saying, why wasn't I sent home to Nana? Why was I placed in this institution? Look at me, I'm covered in tattoos and I'm a gang member now. And I was kind of bullied into it, and I had no choice, and I was only 8 when I went into care. I heard that kind of story again and again, and it just was not good enough, because the evidence was in front of your eyes, and then that man has been in jail a lot, and then he's trying to provide for his children, not very adequately, so that thing rolls on through the generations.
One of the headings in your statement is abuse, and you've talked about abuse perpetrated by staff in many cases. Tell us about that.
Well, the abuse was everywhere we turned, really. It was in the welfare departments, it was in the faith-based people, it was in people's families. We were just surrounded by it. So we were shocked by the level of violence that was meted out on the children and by women. The reports of the jug cord and the bashings from the women in foster placements, and I just do want to reiterate, this is what we were told from the people this is just about this group, but it was widespread and vicious. That's what was reported, but by many hundreds, so it was something that shocked us deeply. The abuse through sexual abuse, well, in the institutions, I mean, even practices like the poor young girls having to have their vaginas looked at all the time with men in the room. I was sitting back there listening to you when you opened this, and I thought, well, do people know that? There was a report done it, but we actually had the honour of meeting some of these women who had to give sexual favours to get in the netball team, and who had to have their vaginas examined over and over, where there were 7 or 8 of them. If you went outside the institution, that was the practice of the day, that everybody thought this was a good thing. But how could it ever be a good thing? And I don't think... so those are sort of systemic issues that were around then. But there was a lot of bullying. I think there was a lot of allowing boys to have fist fights, and we even heard people who were shot at in a state home. They had to run through the sand dunes while they were shot at. So, I mean, some of the things are hair-raising. We heard of people locked in secure care and sexually abused by staff. So there was a wide range of very serious issues that we need to confront. And I don't think it's going to be enough to say, well, this is a one-off case, and we'll see that it doesn't happen again. And, oh, this is a one-off case, or this child died, it's a one-off case, we'll see that it never happens again. I don't know how many times have I heard that in my life, a lot of times. So I think systems need to be revisited.
You've listed on page 55 of the class report various social work practice failures, and then summarise some of those in your statement. Are there any that you would draw attention to?
What's in the report, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
What page is it?
Paragraph 80 of your statement and page 55 of the report.
Yeah, we did this because we tried to distill, we wanted to be used as a platform for the department to focus on if they were trying to look at what we said, although strangely enough I met the chief social worker a couple of times after this was all over and wondered how much had been passed down from our report or from the historic claims into the department to adjust. But at that time, I don't think there'd been any communication whatsoever. Maybe that's changed, but I doubt it. So, you know, the flow of information doesn't necessarily get through. I do know that our report, we met with Paula Rebstock, and our report was well received by Minister Tolley at the time, before the review of it was done by the department, and it went to Paula Rebstock. So let's look at the social work practices. The biggest one for us, I think, was, well, number one, failing to follow the policy. And I think it's worth looking at this list, actually, because it does tell us. New Zealand writes wonderful policy, but we don't implement it very often. So I think that even Australian professor said to me, New Zealanders are all talk, you know. We have these amazing ideas, and you know, but we don't always implement them. So, failure to follow policy, knowing at the time that they weren't. An example of that is keeping young people in solitary confinement when there was a clear direction they were not to do so. And there will be other things. They just go on doing whatever they do on the ground, regardless of policy. That's an extreme statement from me, but that's how I felt at the time. Social workers have failed to monitor and provide real oversight of the children. I think failure to monitor was the biggest one for me. These children, I don't know how often they're looked at, but when they went to see, they saw the carer. They didn't talk to the children on the whole. And, you know, they didn't check where they were sleeping, who had access to them. A lot of the sexual abuse occurs. You don't know who's got access to the children when others come around, or people go on holiday and they give them to other family members to look after, and who their friends come around. There's a whole plethora of things that can happen to children. They can be moved from their beds, for instance, to be abused, and all of those stories were heard by us. So the monitoring needs to be pretty robust. Social workers didn't seem to be trained necessarily to pick up abuse, so I don't know about that now, but that was the view up until recently. They didn't have the education to pick up abuse. Now, the transitioning of children in and out of care was crucial, and that didn't work well. And we even heard people saying, "Oh, well, you live in that white house over there. Off you go." That was the transition to someone who hadn't lived there for years. Multiple social workers, so change. Communication, all of that regarding not communicating to the children when they'd go home, or what their process was going to be, or engaging with the child. Social workers leaving children in the care of known abusers, saying, well, it won't happen again. We know that it happened once, but he's promised me, no, it won't happen again. Then another big one, which may still be an ongoing irksome thing, is the mixing of care and protection children and youth justice children in the one residence. That has been something that which try to avoid, but does happen. And vulnerable children who are there for care, just for care, can be lumped in with incredibly tough, poorly damaged children. And one of the social workers told me that, you know, you could see a kid bang his head on the door of the home, you know, 6, 7, 8, 10 times. So the monitoring is important. Lack of support for the carers is a big one. Carers need a lot of support. There's a lot of work that needs doing that, and multiple placements. People have 40 placements maybe. So your life outcome, if you've got 40, if you're having to engage a lot of times. One man said he just had a paper bag with his stuff in it and just waited for the black car to come. He just pick up his paper bag and move on. knowing that he'd be somebody else. And then this abandonment by the system after a placement. I think some of the social workers call it dumping kids that they can't find a good placement for. Bearing in mind, I know this is not easy work. And then there's the failure to provide the educational, vocational opportunities, failing to provide professional support and counselling, medical and dental care. There was a time they went around and pulled out all the children's teeth, you know. And we met these people, my God, they said people just came in and pulled their teeth out, the whole mouth in one go. Looking for family options, failing to find placements in family and whānau, when they found from their files that people had been writing and uncles and aunties were there that could have taken them. That's where the files came into their own. Sometimes parents were there all along and they'd been told their parents were not there. Many Māori children were institutionalised as soon as they came into care, and I think that became noticeable to us right away, the boys especially, straight to the Hamilton boys home with you sort of thing, rather than a good and thorough look around to try and find a community placement. A staff seeking sexual favours for cigarettes and other privileges. You'll see in the stats that I think about 131 people complained that they had a cigarette addiction they got from being in children in care, and that was quite interesting. So that was a commodity to trade with. And poor evaluation of the cultural placement. There's a lot of things, but we just drew the highlight. We did it because we wanted the social workers to thoroughly go through it and see if they believed that some of those things are things that they could fix.
Can I ask about the psychiatric context? There had been the confidential forum for psychiatric patients, but you did hear from a number of people who'd been in psychiatric care, is that right?
That's true, we did a lot. Some of the people had come twice, they'd been to the first forum, they came again, but others came in for the first time, and so we were doing health, education, welfare and health camps. And so we had a number of psychiatric patients. I haven't got the numbers at my fingertips, but they'll be in the report. And I think, you know, fundamentally they felt that there was no wellness in the system, like they weren't trying to get them well. They were given heavy medication, manhandled against their will, no consent, and that a lot of people went into psychiatric care where they wouldn't now, like if they had postnatal depression. A lot of women who, after their birth of their children, found themselves in the mental health system. It was really, that wasn't a good outcome for them, especially the drugs that were given to people. I mean, the quantities of drugs possible.
ECT as a punishment on occasion too.
That's what was reported to us. And a lot of those kind of reports have been done earlier in other investigations, but we still had people coming forward talking about their time in a mental health system.
From paragraph 90 of your statement, you talk about the legacies of effect on those who have been abused in care.
Yes.
You've covered much of this already, but is there anything you'd highlight?
Yeah, well, you see, I thought when we lodged this report that the government of the day would be really concerned about the level of incarceration in adult prisons of this group. I mean, it's in there, 330 or something had prison sentences, and very high numbers in criminal behaviours, and that all came from the care system. I thought New Zealanders would be shocked, but, you know, not a ripple. So
I just think they just don't know just how dangerous this strategy, taking children into institutions, how very dangerous it is. The children are not safe, and I know I've spoken to people like Margaret Baisley and others, and it is a risk to take children into care, and it's a balancing, isn't it, to get it right, but into institutions or homes is a far greater risk.
Now, I'm just about to move on to your recommendations and lessons. I'll just check with the Chair, if I may, whether this is a time when we may need a short break for the stenographers and sign language interpreters. Maybe just 5 minutes?
Yes, I think that's a good thing to do. The pace has been very steady for a lengthy period, so a short adjournment may deal with that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Kua heke tēnei nohoanga, tēnā ko e tū. The sitting is adjourned, all stand.
Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Judge Henwood, before the brief break, one of the topics was sexual abuse. Is there anything more that you would say on that subject before we move on?
Yes, hold on, just make sure. Oh, right. Is that working? Yes, I did. I would like to expand on that a little bit more, because the people who were sexually abused as children were equal in numbers between men and women. And that was very surprising, and I wanted to just emphasise that. Because the number of boys that were sexually abused, we didn't expect it. You know, there was a sort of stereotype image that young women get raped, and they do. And also we had a lot of complaints of women girls having to put up with regular sexual intercourse with foster fathers, and they would rather do that than be moved, because they liked the place they were in and they liked the mother who didn't know, so they would just do it, take it on the chin. So but it was the boys that were suffering the sexual abuse in large numbers, and we met with Ken Clearwater, and he came along very upset about the numbers of boys that were abused in care, and it was rife. Yeah. Just one thing while you're turning the page on the legacies of effect. I mentioned the criminal convictions and prison sentences, but also there were not everybody went to prison, obviously, and some people stayed in the community. And so 703 said they found it very hard to trust other people, and also complained in difficulty in forming relationships. So they had short marriages and short partnerships, and they had children, but they were always finding it a struggle to form relationships because of the lack of attachments when they were younger, and lack of coping skills. And I, just as someone told us who had been sexually abused by a paedophile, not by someone in state, but he was in state care, but now in prison on a charge of murder. he explained to us that the sexual assault had been so serious on him as a child that he lacked the coping mechanisms to deal with high anxiety issues as an adult, which brought about his behaviour, that brought about the assault that resulted in a murder. But all stemmed back to the sexual abuse. And most of them said to us, the men, that they could handle being beaten up, but the sexual abuse was the thing that made them enraged inside. And so I just wanted to emphasise that, because it's the enragement that is buried in the heart of these people because of their being made so vulnerable by being preyed upon in that way. And some of the legacies of effect were medical conditions. You know, anal rape is not a nice thing when you're a child, and that had medical procedures and things in order to try and rectify. So this stuff is disgusting, but we should pay attention, because unfortunately when we issued our report, not much attention was paid.
Let's go back to your report, the class report, page 37, part 6, has a series of recommendations.
Yes.
Would you like to expand on those for us, or the key ones in particular?
Page 37. Well, I'll just
37.
quickly go through. Well, we wanted the report being released and made public with the response from the government. Well, it was released and there was a response, which we can come to shortly. But at the time, the response didn't come till September 2016, whereas we did this in June 2015, so it took a long time to get the response. But as I do want to say what I said before, that the Minister did put it before Paula Rebstock for her knowledge. So we did say we needed to be urgent steps taken to resolve the claims of abuse and neglect for people who were in care and the claims in the High Court. It seemed to us that this had been dragging on decades, and there's going to be a point in time that these claims have to be settled. So why not just get on with it? By then they had started a fast-track system of settlement, but I don't know how that's played out. I heard from the Crown today that there were 4,000 claims, so that's a lot. Then we get to number 3, acknowledge the need for accountability in the social services sector by designing and implementing an independent body such as the IPCA to resolve historic claims and current complaints and to hold the sector to account. Well, that's what I'm still hoping for, still pushing for. There's always a reluctance to set up yet another, government institution, but the social sector can run free at this time, and I don't think it served us well without having that in place. So I think maybe it's time to face up to spending a few dollars and getting that put in place. It may save lives in the long term.
Don't need you to go into detail necessarily, but what would you see as the main features of such an independent body?
Well, it's something I'd have to give some more thought to, because it wasn't my role, but I'm quite good at designing systems. But I just think there needs to be somewhere independent where people can take their complaint and findings can be made that this has happened, why it's happened, and then action can be taken with some kind of punishment or some kind of cost to the department, so they have an incentive to change their outlook on life. Because whilst I don't want to be too critical, I just believe that I've encountered quite a sense of entitlement, like we know how to do things and it doesn't matter what, we'll just continue doing them the way we do them. And you've got this big department and the ministry and Oranga Tamariki, there's a lot of components to it, a lot of moving parts. And what I've learnt is that what happens in head office is not necessarily linked to what happens out in the field. And so, I have mentioned, I think, that there are lots of nuts and bolts missing in the system. So if you're building a building, it would fall down because the nuts and bolts are key issues. I could give you that example. I once mentioned that I did an inquiry, I think in 2004, and I asked head office, could I meet the person whose job it was to find the good beds in the community, and because that, after all, is a key role. And I asked again, but they said, well, we don't actually have anybody doing that job. So, that's a big nut or bolt that's missing, because if your only job is to find good beds for the children, why isn't there a head office component then linking up? Like if you're in the army, you're not going to move your army without somebody strategising where you're going to get the beds for the night. So I think there's a lot of things that need to be looked at around the nuts and bolts, not the high and glorious policy statements.
Just pausing you there for a moment, one thing this Royal Commission will be able to do is to hear directly from ministry officials and others and ask them questions about their systems. I take it that in class you never had the officials before you in that formal way, but how were you able to get information about the way the system worked?
Well, just by listening to all of the stories and seeing it, and plus I also have some experience from having done some reviews of the system, but I would like, we'll get up to what I'd like for the Royal Commission to do, but staff have contacted me, even staff that have worked 40 years in the department, who have got things they want to say, and they would be very valuable people to meet with, to see what they perceived as the daily obstacles around the way the structures operate. Going back to the recommendations, we did ask number 4, to lift the veil of secrecy and use the data from the confidential forum, confidential listening and assistance service, and the historic claims team and the confidential forum and the Ministries of Health and Education as a basis to offer a public statement to the people of New Zealand about what had happened to those who suffered abuse and neglect in state care, and acknowledge the wrongs of the past. So that's what we wanted to occur. We weren't asking for apology, it wasn't our role, but we felt that the team that I mentioned there could pull together and give the government a basis to make a public statement at the end of class, but of course that didn't happen. Now, one of the key issues for me was the duty of care. So one of the things that shocked me the most, when I started the job, I thought, right, where's the duty of care? Because if we're going to see people who have suffered, and I started ringing around asking, well, where's the duty of care? And it transpired that there has never been a duty of care articulated in the law as clearly as that. And I was told, well, do no harm seemed to be the duty of care. Well, that left me flabbergasted. So one of our recommendations, and as we went through the whole 7 years, that appeared to be the state of affairs. So if you haven't sat down and developed the duty of care for your children of the land that you are taking, then you're a long way from able to deliver good care. Because of course it starts with what you believe your duty is and what that looks like, what shape that should take. And so we wanted that, and a new independent care service. So at the time we were doing this, we had understood from people that we heard from that the care service isn't a separate entity with a person running it and staff and policies and practices. It is all in the one place, along with social workers doing emergency services and scuttling around doing this and that. Now, what it is now, I don't know, because I haven't been a lawyer working in that field, and it may be that they have got an independent care service, but I thought at least you'd be able to see that, measure it, and get accountability from it. But while it's a big amorphous thing. You can't really measure it or get any. Everyone's running from emergency to emergency, and so that's not a very good position to be in. So I wanted them to design and implement an independent specialist care service. So that was what one of our recommendations was, and make a commitment to ensure that practice follows policy by ensuring accountability at all levels within the system. And we felt that was crucial to getting any kind of system that works. So they've got the new department, and they're still in the throes of drawing up whatever they're drawing up regarding practice and policy and duty of care. But it's a long time coming. Meanwhile, we have children out there who need everyone to be completely clear about who's doing what, why they're doing it, and how they're doing it, and how that all interfaces culturally with the communities. Yes, there's two others there around the prisoners and the independently review the data. Well, we wanted all our data independently reviewed and put into the policies and practices of the department. I don't think that has happened. We don't have a very good strike rate, I'm afraid.
Prisoners, what was the recommendation in relation to prisons?
Well, because of the success of the listening panels inside the prison, I took it up actually with the CEO of Corrections, and also we put it in the report, that they would look to having a listening service inside the prison, an independent listening service, so that they could continue on with the work that we had done. It's not a hugely costly strategy, but it is enormously beneficial for making a safer society, which I think we hope that we can paste on some kind of rehabilitation, but it's shallow because it hasn't dealt with the issues that these men and women who are in prison have confronted. So I definitely say they should have a look at it.
What was the response to your report and to your recommendations?
Well, firstly, as I said, we originally met with the Minister of Social Welfare, and that was Anne Tolley at the time, and you'll see she signed the letters. I was puzzled about the structure of this, because if you remember back, I said that I'd been asked to chair a Truth and Reconciliation model, which was set up like an independent entity inside Internal Affairs, a little bit like a commission of inquiry, but not the same. And I had imagined that our report would then go on straight up, and that it wasn't owned by the Department of Social Welfare, because they were the perpetrators, they were just one party. But somehow it didn't turn out that way. They were able to seize back the ground and bring it in-house to continue on the job that Class was doing. And then their minister was the one that was responding, and suddenly it became a welfare, a Department of Welfare strategy. Had I been asked to do that at the beginning, I would not have taken the job. I took the job because of its independence, and now it's sucked back into the department for whatever reason, because I wasn't party to that. So then I end up having to deal with the Minister of the Social Welfare, and also the response that was written to our recommendations was written by the Department of Social Welfare. So I understand that Internal Affairs, Education and Health were part of it, but they didn't really play any role, that it was all written by Welfare. So I was overseas at the time when I got this in September 2016, and oddly enough, I've been talking at Oxford about all of this whole access to justice situation, and this arrived on the email, and I was very concerned to receive the response for two main reasons. At clause 19, it said the final report is written from the experience and knowledge of the service. The service, that's us, the class, the service did not undertake any consultation with agencies to validate the report's findings or provide an opportunity to correct any inaccuracies. So, of course, that I wanted to set fire to my hair when I read that, because obviously the person hadn't read the report or the terms of reference, because it's quite clear we were not to make any findings, and we did not make any findings, and here they are criticising me for not getting the agencies to validate our findings, and they were the participants, and they were allegedly the perpetrators of the abuse and neglect. So why would I ask them to validate our findings that we didn't make? So those sorts of inaccuracies, you know, after 7 years and all the work that our people put in, it was not impressive. Then that goes over to my next concern. In clause 33, across the sectors, there is no evidence that the care systems were universally broken. I don't know what that means, universally broken. Some people who have made claims had periods of positive caregiving environments as well as abusive experiences. I didn't know whether that was supposed to be a good thing or not. I doubt it was a good thing to be only partly abused. The majority of children and young people in care had positive experiences with no abuse or neglect. I wondered what inquiry had taken place to give the confidence to make that statement, because as far as I knew, there'd been no inquiry about the numbers of young people in care who'd had positive experiences with no abuse or neglect, and that is stated as an actual fact. And then it says the number of claims received by the Ministry of Social Development compared with the total number of children placed in care suggests that approximately 3.5% of children in care may have been abused or neglected in some way. This has occurred across all types of care: residential, foster, family whānau and community provider. A universal apology is therefore not recommended. And somewhere else it says it's not warranted, and I
think that might be clause 10 in the executive summary.
Clause 10
Clause 10,
of
yes.
the executive summary. The service recommended a public statement. That was true, but the recommendation was not supported on the basis that the government considers that the majority of children in care did not suffer abuse. So a universal apology is not warranted. However, apologies are made to individual claimants whose claims are accepted. So I have to admit I shed a tear when I read this, because not warranted is a very harsh. When you've heard from 1,103 people so hurt and suffering, and the best you can come up with is a universal apology is not warranted, is not good. And this went to Cabinet, and it was accepted, not by some Cabinet Social Committee, it was accepted without question as the truth of it. And those were the statements made in clause 33 about the 3.5% of children in care may have been abused. But that we couldn't work out if you hadn't had an inquiry onto the extent of it. How would you know that? So that was something that somebody calculated based on the number of people that were suing them, I understood. So, I mean, we had heard, we'd been working for 7 years, and some people came from a whānau. They were just one representative, and they had a whole range of siblings that would have come but said, you can speak for us. They talked of the children that died, and I think if you look at statistics around suicide, if you looked at the children that died, and I had a young man who said to me, I've come to tell you my story, but also that of my Maori friend, that the Maori children had a much worse time and he died. So I'm just not willing to accept this 3.5% that's put there as an absolute fact. It's gone now into the records of our Cabinet, and I felt that was a national disgrace. Strong words, I know, but it's just not good enough servicing for our survivors and the people who've been through this. And the minimisation of, this piece of work is very serious. And I want every Kiwi out there who watch the rugby to turn their energy and minds onto these kind of problems that we need to resolve just as much as our sporting prowess. It's a bit off topic, but you know what I mean.
If we now turn to the last section of your brief on page 19, you talk about your aspirations for this Royal Commission. Perhaps before I get you to read that section, which I think is the way we'll do it, are there any other comments that you'd like the Royal Commission to hear from you?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, I guess. We've covered a lot of ground, and I do want to read that poem that we sent to John Key. I just try to... It's hard for one person to bring alive and imagine what 1,100 people look like. You know, it fills up a huge auditorium. And all of those little kids and what they suffered, I really want you to keep that in your mind and keep focused on what this is all about. It's about the children of the past and the children of the future and how we're going to take care of them and what is the best way forward. And there's no simple answer, but it needs... I did actually go to Paula Bennett and said we need a big thinker on the case, someone who... Well, that was really about resolving all of these issues because we had the historic claims and we had the courts, and we had class, and we had people feeding into the department. It was a complete mess of pottage. We needed a big thinker to make a strategy that was going to work and be effective. But the letter I got back eventually, not from her, but went to the Attorney General and then others, oh no, everything's just fine the way it is. So it just tells you how very, very difficult it is to get the juggernaut to even think about some helicopter thinking about how this could be done better. So I'm going to read out...
Yes, if you start maybe from paragraph 109, I think it is, just under the heading. Yes, it's easier
for me to read out what I hope from the Royal Commission because, I don't want to get it wrong. My language is a bit loose. It's also emotional, this,
So this is just under
it brings it all back to me.
Aspirations for the Royal Commission.
Yes, I hope that the staff at the Royal Commission and the Commissioners are aware of the potential trauma for the participants who decide to re-engage with another process and that they take due care when encouraging evidence and engagement. These participants have already provided so much. Their bravery and courage in coming forward for the service was remarkable. In my view, it is crucial to consider in detail the practices and policies of the social services agencies working with children in care, particularly with regard to systemic failures. Our service was unable to investigate these policies and practices, and there must be a comprehensive assessment of the system in place, which at present appears to be invisible from external assessment. So, you have to turn over every rock. I mean, you need experienced people to tell you where to look, because it's not easy. When I did something, I read the auditor's report. It said that all the plans for these children had been changed, and they'd said that every family had been contacted. When they did an audit, they found no families had been contacted. So I just alerting you to there's many places that you can look and should look if you want to be able to make the system better. How is it able to, continue on and everybody glosses over known errors? Probably because it's so very hard, but nevertheless needs to be simplified and made clearer. I would expect the Royal Commission to speak directly to staff who've worked there over the years and who are willing to share their wealth of knowledge of the systemic issues. So I know it must be difficult for staff listening to all of this because they'll be thinking, that they're under siege, but they're not. I met a lot of staff outside the service who've said to me, I know we could have done a lot more for that family, or I know, but they hadn't ever been challenged, and it was only a court case that challenged their thinking. And so I think we need to get that advice from staff who work there and find out what their views are and collate those, because they will expose another painting. Because it's not always about money, it's always about just thinking needs. What do we need to be doing? Not do we need to just, answer our budget remit or our minister's thoughts of the day. It's the job you're asked to be doing. So I did not think that a Royal Commission with a wide-ranging investigative powers would be necessary. That's when I finished our class service, because I thought there would be an investigation of the care systems, a logical follow-up from the findings. So as the ministry or department's response was as shocking as it was dismissive of the voices of the victims who'd been abused in state care, I was disheartened by the fact that the Cabinet Committee accepted the response without reservation, and to my understanding not much progress was made with our recommendations. Now, I know that they were making a new department, and to be fair, that's been a big piece of work that's underway, and we all hope that the components of that department will answer many of our worries. But I do really emphasise, if nothing else, that the Royal Commission does beyond listening to the survivors. It focuses on the department. So I think I said this before, but I'll repeat it. I believe there are many very dedicated people working to achieve the best care for children in New Zealand. Occasionally over the years I've encountered an attitude through the highest levels within the social service agencies that there is little wrong with the present structures, that they know best, and that actual risk or harm is minimal. The way the systems are set up contribute to this issue, and common sense does not prevail. Maybe financial considerations are the driver, but to that end I consider the Royal Commission's assessment of the social services industry's practice, policies and attitude therein to be essential. So that's just saying more formally that I've just said more loosely. So it's likewise important for the Royal Commission to look at the systems of accountability that currently exist and might be made more robust. And it's not what you're going to be faced with, the same challenge that we did. We made a report, but at the end of the day, is anyone going to do anything about it? And there's a bit of a joke in New Zealand about Royal Commissions being doorstops and all that. You will have heard those. You hear cynicism in the media. It's difficult. Nobody is going to be helpful. So it's a mountain you've got to climb, but it's worth doing, and I think that it's a great honour to have a crack at it, and I do hope that you can do the work that's needed for our country. After all, we remind ourselves we've got 4.5 million people here. How hard can it be to shape up a system that's going to work culturally for all of New Zealand, for Māori, for all of us? So, do you want to ask me any more questions, or shall I read this letter?
I do want to cover one more topic briefly.
You can. I'm open to questions. I've been talking a long time.
You'll see in the government response document.
Yes.
Near the end, clause 44, said under the heading disability perspective, answer none.
Who wrote this thing? I don't know.
You already mentioned earlier that it was a challenge for class to hear the perspective of particularly intellectually disabled people.
Yes.
But do you have any thoughts that you can offer to our commissioners about how they could do better in terms of ensuring that the disability perspective is heard and addressed?
Well, there are people working in the sector who are very knowledgeable and wise, and I'm sure that they will come forward. How you get to engage with individual citizens who are suffering from a significant disability will be a big challenge. I'm pleased that you have this as a specific entry point at the Commission. I'd like to think some more, and I can tell. I mean, we went endlessly to organisations that purportedly represented the disability sector and beseeched them to help us get access to the people, but we were not successful because it was all of the blind people. We didn't really see more than one or two. As I said, the deaf community, but then there were individuals in wheelchairs suffering from significant disability, and their carers did bring them forward, and we did struggle through. But I felt that lacked, that we didn't do a good job there. Not that we weren't willing, but we couldn't find a pathway through. So I wouldn't give us a high mark on the report card for that. But when you look at this document here, it says human rights implications. The government response to the final report of the Confidential Listening and Assistance Service is consistent with the Bill of Rights and the Human Rights Act 1998. Well, that's a pretty strong statement given everything that I've been saying, and that they felt that they were consistent with our human rights. It's really extraordinary. Gender implications? None. Disability perspective? None. So as I said, I don't really have much confidence in this response, but more disappointing is that the Cabinet Committee was not more on its toes to see through this response from the department. And it wasn't a Truth and Reconciliation response. It was handed over to the Welfare Department to write back at class, and that I felt was very what's the word? I can't even find a word. I didn't think it was a lawful structural strategy that should have been followed.
Mr. Chair, may I just take one moment to talk to Ms Haronga, who worked with Judge Henwood on this statement?
Certainly.
Your Honour, thank you very much for your evidence. I think you wanted to close by reading paragraph 115.
Yes. The reason, when people came to see us, we tried to assist them or give them as much support to do something positive in their lives, albeit get their life story written or connect with whānau or their cultural background. And one woman came to see us and she'd written us this poem. She lived in the South Island. She was not a Maori person. And she wrote this poem. And we could think of nothing that we could do to help her. So we decided to see that this poem was sent to the Prime Minister of the day, who was John Key, and get an assurance that he had actually read this poem. And we did get that assurance. And I'd hope that when he read it, because it does sum up everything that I've been trying to say, and it's called A Letter to the System. To whom it may concern, to the one without a face or a name, here's a letter from a ward of yours who carries your whole system's shame. You pulled me from my parents, this I accept and understand, but while I was taking this journey, who was there to hold my hand? I was told I belonged to you. It was your job to watch me grow, but I don't think you were able to see me with so much moving to and fro. I was quiet and shy and unsocial, distrusting everyone as I grew. You were blind to all those bruises then. Please don't be blind to the scars now. In your care I learnt my value. I learnt my place, my worth. I learnt my lesson, my worth, my place. In short, I learnt I was not a child, but simply another hopeless case. Your carers stole my childhood. He with his dirty old man's hands and her leather belt and punches, knowing no one caring where I land. So I write this letter to you, and I ask that you take some blame. But I cannot sign it sincerely when you left me with so much pain.
Judge Henwood, thank you very much for your evidence. Mr Chair, we're at that stage where it's appropriate to inquire of the participants if anyone wishes to seek permission to ask questions. I wonder if we go through that exercise now before we break so that we know whether there are any questions or topics that people would like to ask about.
Yes, I think that will be a sensible way in which to progress things. Are there any expressions of wish to ask Judge Henwood questions? Counsel first. There aren't.
On that basis, Mr Chair, I wonder whether it's appropriate for commissioners now to ask any questions that you have, or whether you'd like to have the break now for an hour and return with that after the break.
I'll just solicit a view about that. Is anyone? No, I don't. Do you want to ask her a question? Okay. Sorry, I can't hear you. No one else does. Judge Shaw and Dr. Aotearoa have two questions.
Mine are very short, and I'm sorry. Mine are very short, but before I do, I want to acknowledge your evidence, Judge Henwood, and thank you very much for it. The first one is a matter of detail. You referred to Paula Rebstock and the fact that you referred your report to her, or you in some way consulted with her. For the record, can you just tell us what was her role at that time?
Well, we gave the report to Minister Tolley, and she gave the report, I believe, to Paula Rebstock.
In what capacity, though, was Paula Rebstock?
Paula Rebstock was doing a report for the government on state care.
Right, so that's what I'm trying to, just to make sure we get that clear for the record. What exactly
she met with us for many hours and talked to us about anything and everything that we could advise her.
Right.
But her report came out on a date a long time after that. I don't know whether it was taken into account, but I'm sure she did.
Okay, that's the first question. The second one, you referred in your recommendations to your belief in an independent care service.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering whether you see any relationship between that and the current Children's Commissioner role, or do you see it as something different from that oversight role that the current Children's Commissioner has?
I'm talking about the actual care service, those delivering the care.
So it's a
the
delivery
Children's
service.
Commissioner is the accountability. I'm talking about the service that's delivering the care to the children right now.
Yeah.
And I don't mean independent necessarily from the state. I mean independent from the department, because the department is a big department.
Yes.
And my understanding at that time when we said that, and they've changed, is that the social workers were doing emergency call-outs. There was not a dedicated just doing the care. So everybody was rushing around doing a variety of jobs, and I couldn't see how you could have a coherent care system without an actual care system.
Right. So the differences between the oversight and of the commission, of the Children's Commission, but this, you're talking operation. Delivery of the care.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Not such a haphazard way.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Aotearoa.
Tēnā koe, kanui te mihi ki a koe, Judge Henwood. So my question follows really from my colleague. You also mentioned that in your recommendations that there could be an independent body akin to the IPCA to hear complaints about historical and contemporary. So was the vision that that would replace the historical claims unit administered by MSD and redress schemes offered by Ministry of Health and the other agencies?
Yes, that's all inside the department doing its own thing.
Yeah.
I'm talking about an independent organisation set up specifically to receive complaints, like a tribunal or like the Police Complaints Authority for those people who are children who suffered in the care of the state.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And I wanted to ask about the treaty. You do note that from participants, the view that you had was that Māori children were more likely to be escalated up to the residences, like Aotearoa, for example, and also to be picked up for quite trivial reasons like truancy, for example. And I just wonder, from your view, what you got from the participants about the reasons why this was the case.
Well, we didn't talk politics with the participants because they'd come to talk about their family life. So in a way we didn't, but then as we went through, we started to see a pattern emerging that, oh, isn't it funny, all these Māori boys seem to go straight into home and into a like the Hamilton Boys' Home, or into a place where they were incarcerated rather than another kind of placement. It started to become noticeable. So it's hard to imagine, but when you're doing these hearings, you're not talking to them about the things that we're talking about, mum and dad and their life, not about the rearrangements of the state and all of that. But we noticed it over time, just as we noticed a lot of people hadn't developed as adults because of the suffering that it has as children, even physically.
Okay. Just another question on the counselling that was provided. I see that participants were offered 12 hours of counselling.
Sessions.
Yes, I have to meet with you.
10 or 12, yeah.
But just for clarity, I think for those tuning in, the ACC funded counselling was for only those who had been subjected to sexual abuse while in care. Is that correct?
ACC counselling, yes.
Yeah.
The counselling we provided was for coming to see us.
That's right.
And also for getting their files, and so that was a separate piece of counselling.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent a lot of time trying to match up the right counsellor for the right person, because very difficult for some really angry gang members and so on to get them a right counsellor. It's an art form to help people. But those that then were referred on, our facilitators and so on found the right, negotiated with ACC to get that ongoing counselling.
Yes, I see that. And the significance of the ACC funded counselling is that it endures beyond 12 sessions and could be long term, but that's not available to those who have not suffered sexual abuse while in care.
That's my belief,
that's right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. One last thing is that I thought it was interesting, the innovation, the pastoral care, about how you provided help to participants keeping the lights on,
yes,
food, housing.
Getting the power on, we worked hard to get jobs for them, we tried to get in work, counselling, just rebuild their lives, and also some people who were on parole, who were showering in public toilets, and a plethora of things that we tried to help with and get them connected to their probation officers, and just trying case by case an intense pastoral care package, which I think is quite unique. It's not been done in any of the Royal Commissions. So I think it was a very, very valuable service, because we were there 7 years. I think we had one person who rang us every day for 7 years. And we didn't mind that because we were there to support. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't, at the end of this, I wanted to acknowledge the people because today that I'd come forward for the participants, I didn't want to concentrate on the staff or the panel members of class, because that was not our focus and that was not my reason for coming. It wasn't about the service we provided, it was about how we were honoured by the people coming forward and sharing their stories. But when I end, I do want to refer people to page 7 of the class report, which does have the listings of the panel members and the staff that were there. And I wonder if I could just take 1 second to say that, because you can't know the effort that was made by them. And so I just would like to say Gordon McFadden was the Executive Director, and Claire Booth, Shelley Gabrielle, Kelly Coxon, Audrey Barber, and Claire, Shelley and Kelly, they were the ones that interfaced personally with every single participant and took their phone calls and registered with them and gave them all the pastoral service. And then Philippa Sherloin, Ruth Lewis, Still Leach, Matt Hakiaka, Wakabi Ashby, all of those were on the staff. And then Dr. Barbara Disley, Paula Day, Malia Hamani, Bob Newsom, Dr. Ian Hassel, Doug Horaki, Janice Donaldson, Winifred Jackson, Dame Areta Kupu, Mike Noonan. They were our panel members, and their warmth and support given to the participants that came forward was outstanding. I just wanted to mention them in closing.
Judge Henwood, thank you again very much for your time and for your evidence.
Thank you, Judge Henwood. Thank you, Mr Mount. That does now seem a suitable time at which we could take the luncheon adjournment. Madam Registrar.
Kua heke tēnei no hoanga, tēnā koe e tū. The sitting is adjourned, all stand.
You can see it in our